Hi, this is Angelina Asante. Welcome to another episode of Southwest Florida Online News. Today, my guest is D.L. Havlin. He is an accomplished author and historian, and we're so excited to have him. Hi, D.L.
Hi, Angelina. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
So, you have some exciting news today. Something big is happening in your career today. Can you tell the audience what's going on?
Yes, I can. I have a short story in an anthology that is supported by the Oak Ridge Boys, and I'm sure that most of your audience will be very familiar with that group. They were very popular for the second half of the 1900s, actually. They've been around for 40 years. And one of the singers out of the group, Joe Bonsall, is also an author. And he had read one of my books when they decided to put out a album called Christmas Cookies and re-release it. Basically, they put out a short story anthology with it called Christmas Cookies Mysteries, and my short story is in the book.
So, now which one of your books did he read?
A Place No One Should Go.
Okay, so can you kind of give us some background about what that story is about?
Yeah, it's set in the Florida Everglades, and it's about a family that takes a camping trip and goes out and ends up picking a camping spot on the top of an old Indian mound. And while they're setting up camp, a Seminole happens by and warns the main character, Ben, that it is a place that no one should camp. And unfortunately, Ben is a little bit on the stubborn side and decides to camp there. And he learns all about the Calusa Indian spiritual heritage by experiencing some ghostly proceedings.
So now you are a very well-researched author. You really dive into history here. Now, what kind of history did you do about that tribe?
Well, I'm very fortunate. I live on Pine Island, which is in the Southwest Florida area, near the Randall Research Center. And that was the largest established Calusa village. In fact, it was the capital of the Calusa Nation for many years. And an interesting point there, Angela, was that it was called Tampa. And when the Spanish map makers made their maps, they located the village in the wrong place.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yes. The Calusa village that is located where the Randall Research Center is now is about 54 acres of middens and mounds. There's a really wonderful museum there, and it's administered by the University of Florida. And you can learn a lot about the Calusa Empire that lasted for over 1,000 years and was the primary Indian or Native American, let's say, that commanded this area when the Spanish arrived in the early 1500s.
Wow, that's really interesting. Now tell me, how did they find you and ask you to be part of this book?
Well, Joe Bonsall is represented by the same literary agent that I am. And he read one of my books as a result of that, loves that, and asked me to write a short story. They're all mysteries. And the short story that I contributed is called Aunt Elvira's Jewels. And, of course, Elvira was one of the Oak Ridge Boys' greatest hits.
Right, that's a great song.
Yeah, we each one of them has a reference to one of the some recordings in the Christmas album, and mine happens to be Hey Baby.
So now the book actually came out today, the digital version, but the paperback version is available when?
That's November the 1st. You'll be able to pre-order the week before that. You can go to Amazon, order them through Barnes & Nobles, and like I say, the ebook is supposed to be up and running today.
Okay, that's exciting. And we'll put the links in to the podcast notes for our listeners. Now, can you kind of tell me something about When Women Found Their Wings? This is a book that you're working on right now. And when you told me the name of this great character from history, this is a real person that I had never heard about. Why don't we hear about people like Jacqueline Cochran? And can you tell the audience who she is and why we should know this name?
I'd be happy to. What I was doing was I teach a lot of history courses, for example, for Master the Possibilities and other groups. And I like to find Florida characters or Florida historical characters that actually contributed a lot and few people know about. And so far, the greatest contributor that I've run into that has practically no stage or platform is Jacqueline Cochran, and she's so important. Jacqueline Cochran was born in the early 1900s in Sawdust Road. That's like Tobacco Road, Florida's version of Tobacco Road, the area up in the Panhandle around Defuniak Springs and Panama City. In that period of time, it was just a series of small sawmill towns, and the people there basically lived like the coal miners lived. They lived on company script. Well, she was born there. She didn't have a pair of shoes until she was 6 and didn't sleep in a bed till she was 10, and she had less than 1 full year's formal education. She learned everything by reading. And she struggled to advance herself, ended up being a hairdresser, moved to Atlanta and then to New York. And by the age of 19, she was self-sufficient in New York City, and she got a job at Saks Fifth Avenue in their hairdressing and styling organization and became an instant success there. When she was there, she met a man by the name of Floyd Odlum. Now, that name may not be familiar to you, but he was one of the 9 richest men in the world at that time. Jacqueline was an extremely beautiful lady, and at some point they developed a friendship, and eventually in 1936 became married. One of the things that Jackie wanted to do was she wanted to experience flying. So she went up in a plane, and this was a couple of years before her marriage to Odlum, and she just fell in love with flying. That's what she wanted to do. She met Amelia Earhart, and they became best friends. And in the mid-30s, from 36 on, Jacqueline became one of the 2 premier pilots in the world, female pilots in the world. Her and Amelia Earhart became inseparable. In fact, I'm looking at a picture right now of the 2 of them sitting on a diving board on by a swimming pool. And Floyd Odlum financed most of Amelia Earhart's trips, including the one where she was lost flying around the world. Jacqueline became known as the Speed Queen, and I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit so you can get a feel for Jacqueline. She set more records for speed, endurance, and altitude and distance than any other pilot, living or dead, male or female, and her records still hold today.
Now,
that's quite an accomplishment.
Why do you suppose that, and I guess it's who writes history, but why do you suppose we have never heard of this woman? That's crazy.
Well, I think I can answer that. And in fact, during the Second World War, she was the one who originated the WASP. That's the Women's Air Service Pilots. And basically what happened was they were successful, and there was a real conflict between her and some of the press. Some of it goes back to her relationship with Floyd Odlum, who divorced his first wife to marry her. And one of the other facts was the fact that people like Drew Pearson and Dorothy Thompson and many were very anti-women. What Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a close friend of Jacqueline Cochran, and her did was try to advance and put women on an even footing. A lot of people disliked intensely that Jacqueline Cochran even flew, that she was even allowed in an airplane. And because of that, a lot of the media at the time tried to destroy her. One of the things that's interesting is that the media and the Congress was so brutal in the way they treated her and the women air service pilots that they forced a 30-year gap and froze all of the records involved with the WASP and would not allow them to be released to anyone for 30 years after the war. Does that give you an idea why you've never heard of her?
Wow. But it's much further past 30 years. So why are we not including her in history books?
Mainly just because of the fact that she's past news. Let me give you some other ideas of things that she's done. She was the first woman to land a plane on an aircraft carrier. She was the first woman to break the sound barrier. She was the person who talked Dwight Eisenhower into running. She actually organized a rally at Madison Square Garden without Eisenhower's knowledge and promoted him, filmed the whole rally where the people went wild to have him run for president, took the film that she made, flew to Paris where he was stationed, ran it for him, and convinced him he should run for president. She was the lady who coined the phrase, "I like Ike."
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, she's unbelievably good. They gave the Odlums, Jackie and her husband Floyd, gave 90% of their fortune away before they died to the two charitable causes.
Wow, it's so strange because I heard growing up Amelia Earhart, that was like the big female hero, right, for anything to do with airplanes, but I had never heard of this woman, and it's kind of disgusting that we're still not hearing about her.
Yeah, part of that is because of people like the Congressman Ramspeck, who had the Ramspeck Commission, and it was a civil service group. And what happened was, early in the war, the WASP were ballyhooed, and everybody loved them. And the reason why was there simply weren't enough pilots, and they performed all kinds of functions. That's the subject for my book, When Women Found Their Wings. And what happened was, towards the end of the war, after D-Day in 1944, and it was assured that the Allies would win the war, the press turned on them and the Congress turned on them. And the reason why was a lot of the U.S. Pilots and the U.S. Men joined the CAT and the CAA to avoid going into the draft. And in 1944, both of those organizations were disbanded, and that meant they were either going to have to go into service, and that could be in the infantry, which they didn't want to do, or as pilots. So what they did was immediately try to disparage the women's air service pilots so they didn't have to be drafted into the service. And Ramspeck and Drew Pearson and that group, including Cronkite, all basically were against having women pilots. In fact, in my book, I reprint an article from Time magazine which says women are undesirable and unneeded and undesirable to be in the air. And if you can imagine what that would happen today if Time printed that.
Oh my gosh. Well, they're busy printing other stuff that I wouldn't read. Well,
I'm with you.
Thank you so much for your time, and I'm excited to look forward to our Veterans Day special, which we're going to be having with you because you're such a great historian. So look for his book right now, Christmas Cookie Mysteries, and his story, Aunt Elvira's Jewels. Sorry. But thank you for joining me, D.L. I always appreciate talking to you.
Anytime. I love talking to you, and it's always my pleasure.
Thank you. This is Angelina Asante signing off for another episode of Southwest Florida Online News.